So when you start to have a look at some of our resources and the videos that we've got on YouTube, you start to have a few questions about the whole flipped classroom pedagogy. How does it work? What do the students do for homework? What do the students do in class? What do you do in class? And how does it all work? Well, the purpose of this video is to talk you through the pedagogy of the flipped classroom for teaching A-level, combined with our videos and our student learning records to try and address some of those questions that you might have. So I came to the realisation a couple of years ago now that there was something wrong in my classroom. The students were learning, they were doing well, but I was stood at the front teaching, not having a huge amount of time for interaction with individuals, and every time it came to a lesson observation, although what I was doing I knew worked, I knew it also wasn't going to satisfy what an observer was actually looking for. And that was a problem because I started to plan different lessons for observations, and that just can't be right. Surely you should be giving the best experience to students, or what's considered the best experience to students, all the time. I also had some other growing concerns, like how am I going to cover this entire specification? When you look at the new specifications for A-level, you just think, I haven't got the time to cover that, what am I going to do? And one of the awkward things is that I know that all my students really deserve the same knowledge. So although we're supposed to be differentiating and giving different exercises to different students of different abilities, I've always been a little bit uncomfortable with that because surely every student is entitled to the same experience, the same body of knowledge. So we've got a bit of a problem there because we need to square differentiation against the right to be taught the same knowledge and have the same experience. Now, too much teacher talk is not considered good practice today, but from my experience, some students definitely learn better that way. Some students don't like the whole group work, they don't like the paired activities. They are quite happy actually to sit and learn in a traditional way, make some notes and ask you a few questions. So by taking very contemporary approaches, what we find is that it isn't, again, meeting the needs of all our learners. And so we've got a responsibility here to make sure that every student is learning in a way that suits them, and that's not an easy task at all. And let's face it, when you're at the front of the class and you're teaching, you've got a certain amount of safety there because you know that you are imparting knowledge to them. You may not know exactly how much they're taking in or are going to retain over a long period of time, but you at least feel confident you're doing your job. But I know that too much teacher talk is not a good thing and we need to cut that back, and I was finding myself definitely in observation situations doing as little of that as possible, but secretly knowing that when an observer is not watching my lesson I was doing other things, and so I wanted to address that. We need to personalise the experience, as I've said, giving students real choices in their learning and allowing them to take ownership of the task. For far too long as teachers we've been telling them, write that, draw that diagram, explain this, but really they should have the choice about how they're demonstrating their learning. Our responsibility is to make sure they're learning the right things in the most appropriate ways, and for them then to demonstrate that learning how they wish. So if one student wants to create an animation, why not? If another student wants to create a video, why not? If another student wants to write an essay, why not? Surely they should have the choice about how they learn so that they can take ownership of that whole experience, and by doing that you're going to get the personalisation and the differentiation that you crave. And students make the best progress when you can spend time with them. And again, that's another challenge because particularly in big classes it's even more of a challenge, but even at A-level with the smaller classes, having enough time to spend with each individual and really get under the skin of their understanding and their learning can often be a challenge, especially when you know you need to move on to the next activity and you're chasing that progress and you're chasing that pace, and it can be very difficult. And let's face it, students hate homework. And it needs to be meaningful. I think far too often we're setting homework for homework's sake and not really thinking about why are they doing it, how are they going to get the support to do it, and how are they going to get the best out of it. And these are all the problems that I really wanted to address in my own classroom. And I started doing some research and looking at other models and other approaches. And when I discovered the flipped classroom approach, it really changed and revolutionised the way I thought about teaching and what a teacher's role really is in the classroom. So one of the questions is, what do the students do for homework? Well, simply they watch the video. So in advance of the lesson, you will have told them which video they have to watch. Now, good practice says that those videos are no more than about 10 minutes. That's long enough for you to get across exactly what you need them to in a fairly traditional way. And they just watch the video. Of course, the massive advantage with that is that they can pause, they can rewind, they can watch it again. And of course, if you're taking a more traditional approach of teaching them from the front of the class, they can't do that. And what was interesting was in my own lessons, I had students occasionally pull out a mobile phone and say, oh, if I can just record this, sir, that would be really helpful because I can play it back later. And of course, I felt a little bit uncomfortable about this. I didn't quite know where this video was going to end up. And then I had students taking photos of what was on the board and things like this, and I just began to realise that actually, if I was capturing this for them, it would be much better. And I think, like all humans, when I'm at the front of the class and I'm on the board, I'm babbling away and I will take diversions and go off on a tangent, and sometimes that's really useful because it's interesting and it's relevant and students want you to and they need you to, and that's fine, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I was using a lot of time up by going into things that were really just adding a little bit more confusion, and students were starting to remember the things that weren't important and not the things that were, and that's just an issue. So by having videos, it allows you to consolidate down into a maximum of 10 minutes exactly what you want them to know, and they can pause, rewind and play back at their own time. And of course they can do that during revision time as well, which is really, really helpful. Now, from my experience, just watching the video is not really quite enough because they still arrive at the class and they don't remember everything in the video, and it just makes it a little bit clunky. So what I've learned is that if students have an exercise book, for example, and they make some simple notes as they're watching the video, they can bring those into the class, and that really helps to remember the things that they were learning. So when they do some exercises in class, they can refer to those. And it solves another problem too, because I'm sure you're going to be expected to give them a mark for homework or report their attainment in homework, and that's all a bit tricky if you've got school systems that mean you have to do things in a particular way. And so what you can do now is use your exercise book and mark it if you need to. I mean, I don't. What I'm marking is the kind of effort that they're putting into the note taking, the quality of their notes, if you like, and I can do that very simply on a 4-point scale. But whatever systems you're using in school, if you've got a little bit of evidence there in an exercise book, you can do what you need to do in order to satisfy what your school is looking for in that context. But the critical thing here is the students just watch the video. You must resist the temptation to set other tasks. The moment you do, you're not following this flipped classroom pedagogy approach. So it's important that you don't think, oh, they're not doing very much here, I'll give them a little activity, or they can finish that off for homework. Try and resist that and just make them watch the video. If they do it well and they get into the habit of that, it will be more than useful for them just to be watching the video. Now, of course, the question at this point is, what about the students that don't watch the video? Well, that will happen, but what you'll find is that will happen in the early stages of the course because they won't be familiar with that approach that you're taking, in the same way that you're going to find it a little bit difficult to adapt to this approach at first too. But keep the faith, resist the temptation, and plan for the fact that they will have watched the video. Make that your expectation, and the more you have that expectation, the more they will actually comply, because what will happen is they will very quickly realise they know less than other people in the class, and that makes them feel a little bit uncomfortable. And as soon as you start to give it little activities that they have to do, and they really haven't got a clue what's going on, they will feel very awkward, and very quickly they will realise that watching the video is not that painful, and it is hugely advantageous to them. And you can easily sell it. I do to my classes. I say, look, your homework is just watching videos. You can't say fairer than that, can you? And they get on board with that fairly quickly. But at first, it is a bit clunky, it's a bit awkward, and you might find that there will be a few students that haven't watched the video, and they maybe need to watch the video in class. It's not really what you want them to be doing, but in those early stages, while they're getting familiar with it, whilst you're making them feel a little bit awkward for not doing their homework, then there's no harm, is there? They can put their headphones in and they can watch the video in class, and that will work for you. So, if the students are doing all the learning at home, what do they actually do when they come into the class? Well, I want you to think about it like this. You flipped the classroom, so the things that they used to do in class they're now doing at home, and the things that they were doing at home they're now doing in the class. So let's think about that. You've been setting them activities for homework in the past. Well, it's those kinds of activities that they're now going to do in the classroom. Now, this can feel a little bit strange at first, because your natural tendency is going to be to try and teach them rather than starting with something that you think they don't know, or they don't know very well. But it does work, and I think, today we're used to doing starter activities, and when students come into the lesson kind of getting going straight away and not necessarily waiting for everyone to arrive all at the same time, and having something for them to do on the board as they come in, all those kinds of things. They're very modern approaches, and this is what we can do with the flipped classroom approach really easily. And one massive advantage for you as a teacher is you know their starting points, because you know they've watched the video, you know what's in the video, you know what it is that they've learned. So this idea of starting your lesson or sequences of lessons, finding out what they know, so that you can then somehow, in the heat of the moment, change and adapt what you're doing to meet their needs, is just not something that is necessary with a flipped classroom approach, because you know their starting points. You might have to justify that a little bit in observational context and explain a little bit about the pedagogy and what's going on, because to the untrained eye it can look like you're not really assessing their starting point, but it's very easy to justify, and it gives you a massive advantage as a teacher. So, what they do in class is consolidation tasks that are based on the content of the video, and they evidence their learning. They make choices about how they're going to present their learning. They respond to questions that you might have for them individually, and as a result they're going to improve their outcomes, because one of the key advantages of this approach is you're going to spend more time with individual students, and that allows you then to really get under the skin of what they know. Now, I'm not suggesting here that we're not going to do paired activities and group activities and bits of role play and all this sort of thing. Absolutely we are. I mean, why not? I mean, there's a huge benefit in doing those kinds of things. So we do need a little bit of variety in this, and those are all good things, and they can still happen. That's absolutely fine. But the key fundamental thing that is not happening is you are not standing at the front, you are not imparting any knowledge, you are not trying to teach them the content, because they already come to the lesson knowing what they need to know from the videos. So really the purpose of the lesson is for them to evidence that learning, and for you to check their understanding, to make sure that any inaccuracies are ironed out, and any misunderstandings in their learning are addressed. That's the key thing. Now obviously with a computing course, programming is a massive part of that, and so you can devote some of the lesson time to programming as you wish, to add a little bit of variety. Whole loads of approaches that you can take with the programming. You can have whole lessons on it, you can have half lessons on it, and you can have blocks of time on it, and all those things work and they're absolutely fine. But you might find with the flipped classroom approach that to add a little bit of variety, you might have 20 minutes towards the end of a lesson where you think, actually, if you finished a bit of theory work and you've captured your learning and you're happy with that, then continue with some programming activities. And because your programming activities are going to be personalised and differentiated, it allows students to work at their own pace through those too. So that's what they do in class. You're going to resist that temptation to teach them. You're going to resist the temptation to give them too many directed activities where you're chasing that pace, because there will be enough independence and personalisation and differentiation in what they do. So with our student learning records, they provide a framework for this flipped classroom approach. We've got all our videos on YouTube that support the specification and the content that's required, and the student learning record is a sheet that outlines some of the key expectations that you might see in the work that they produce. So in this example, you must include at least one diagram which depicts the fetch, decode, execute cycle. Now how they do that is completely up to them, and these are really just suggested activities. Of course you can put other things in there too, and we will have some additional activities that you can do in class that will be available through our site. But this gives them a framework of some of the key things that they would need to be evidencing in their learning to show that they really do understand the content and they've covered the things that you need them to cover. Now we'll consider how you actually assess these student learning records in another video, because this is really just focusing on the flipped classroom pedagogy. Now the student learning records are really supposed to be A3 sheets of paper, and on the flip side of the A3 sheet you've got a blank sheet. And the whole point of the blank sheet is this is where the students evidence their learning, and this is where they start to make choices. It may well be that they decide to make a diagram, it may be they decide to write a few bits and pieces, maybe they annotate something. Really the approach is completely up to them. And of course it doesn't really need to be a sheet of paper either. It could be that they would create an animation, it could be that they create a short video clip. It's completely up to them. They are evidencing their learning in your lesson. So you may well have different students doing very different things, and that is what you want. That's where your differentiation and your personalisation is really coming from, because the students are taking ownership and they are deciding for themselves exactly what they're going to do to show you that they have learnt the content, and they do that within the framework of the student learning record. So the blank sheet is intended to be that way because it really is up to the individual student what they want to produce. Now here I want you to think about something else that is a critical thinking skill. If you give a student an A3 sheet of paper and you say everything from this topic must be captured on this A3 sheet of paper, then what they have to do is distill the information and decide what's important and what's not, because they may not have enough space on the sheet to put everything that they would want to put. And so they have to make choices about which bits they were going to include and which bits they're not going to include. Their annotations are going to need to be very concise, because actually an A3 sheet of paper for a single topic at A level is not a lot of space. Now obviously if they're going to decide to create a presentation or an animation or something like that, then they're gaining a bit of space that way, and they can do those things. But what I would encourage them to do is use those as supplementary tasks and activities, and with the A3 sheet try and distill all the knowledge from the topic onto one sheet. Now when it comes to marking, you're going to have a look at that and you're going to judge how well they've done that, and when they get it back they can then add to it, change it, do a second version of it and prove that they're acting on your feedback, which is again what we want to see in modern marking approaches. And what you can then do at A level is bring that sheet back out, and they can add the new A level knowledge to that sheet that they didn't require at AS level. And again, it shows to someone that's going to be looking at your work and looking at your marking and feedback that they are going back to topics and they're making improvements as a result of your feedback and as a result of them gaining knowledge in their learning. So this is a fantastic way to introduce the differentiation into your lessons, because it's actually the students that are choosing what the differentiated tasks are and not the teacher. So finally, we consider, what do you do as a teacher in a lesson? And in a nutshell, you're going to spend time with individuals. You're going to be asking them some deep, high-level questions. You can really get under the skin of what they know, and you can examine their work, you can check their understanding, and you'll be amazed at what you learn by spending more time with individuals, because you think they will understand it, and then when they try and explain it back to you, it will be clear that some students definitely understand it better than others. But even those that you would think really understand what you're talking about, you are going to uncover some misconceptions and inaccuracies and some thoughts they have that you otherwise wouldn't have uncovered, because there wouldn't have been time in the past. You'd have asked them some questions, they'd have given you some responses, and it would have given you enough for you to think as a teacher that they understood what you were talking about. But when you spend more and more and more time with them, you start to realise that when you go very deep into this high level questioning, that actually what they know is a little bit shallow, and it gives you a great opportunity to fill in the gaps and have different conversations with different students, and they really enjoy that, they like that, and it allows you again to put in that personalisation and that differentiation in the questioning, in the time you're spending with them, and some of the things that you're going to actually end up talking to them about. What's critical here is you are going to resist the temptation to teach. This is not easy. You are going to find that you'll have a natural tendency, particularly at the start of a lesson, to want to be at the front and to start leading. You'll start to have some doubts about whether they've actually watched the videos, whether they've actually understood the content, whether the video was good enough for them to actually get the knowledge that you wanted them to get. And you will want to start teaching just to make sure that you're confident again that you're imparting that knowledge. You can't do that. You've got to resist that temptation, because you're going to drain away all that time that you are trying to get in order to put in that differentiation, that personalisation, that student choice, that deep level questioning, that time with the individuals. So you've got to resist the temptation to do any kind of teaching here. They will learn in a much better way, because you are already teaching in a highly personalised and differentiated way. What you're doing by starting your lesson by talking to individuals rather than teaching them from the front is a far, far better way of teaching. You just have to keep the faith with it. So I hope that video has been useful to you, and it's covered some of those questions and answers that you might have about this approach in terms of the students and homework, the students in the class and you in the class. And in another video we'll look at assessment and how you think about those student learning records in terms of assessing their progress. Now, this video has been the result of us getting a load of questions through the website about this approach and how we use the SLRs and those kinds of things. And so if you've got a question about our approach, then please post it to craiganddave.org, and we will have a look, and maybe we'll be making another video that will address some of your questions.